Ancient Egypt has so many stories to tell. 170 pharaohs from 30 different dynasties across 3,000 years. And yet one name rises above all: Ramses II, the pharaoh that ruled the longest, built insane temples like these, brought Egypt to its territorial height in Nubia, the Levant, and North Africa, and led Egypt to the most legendary battle of the Bronze Age, the Battle of Kadesh, where 6,000 chariots were between the Hittites and the Egyptian armies. Let's talk about it. We want to talk about the Egyptian people so we can understand the context of this human being's existence. And of course, in order to talk about ancient Egypt, we have to talk about the Nile. So the Nile is the longest river in the world, and contrary to the civilizations that were happening in the Middle East at the time, like the Sumerian civilization, the Babylonian civilization, the Assyrians, and all the other guys in Mesopotamia, they had to work really hard to make their crops coming from irrigation canals and use animal husbandry. The Egyptians had it way easier. The Nile floods regularly between June and September. It's called an inundation. The main sources of calories were bread and beer, supplemented by onions, garlic, lentil, and figs. Beer was a common form of government pay for public projects because it was so portable. Beer was food that you could easily store and obviously made the people quite cheerful. Meat was rare for the poor, but plentiful for the elite, who also enjoyed honey-sweetened desserts, banquets for nobles, and imported wine. So commoners lived in these mud brick homes clustered along the Nile, and wealthier families had larger homes, and they had painted walls and painted courtyards. Men typically wore linen kilts and women wore linen dresses, often pleated, and both sexes adorned themselves with jewelry: gold, turquoise, and lapis lazuli. By the way, if you recognize the ancient Egyptian style of eyeliner, it was not just for beauty, but also for sun protection, like ancient football players. Egyptians had harps, lutes, and drums to provide the soundtrack for life. Worship of the sun god Ra, the god of the dead Osiris, the god of fertility and air Amun shaped festivals and daily rituals. Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of the soul and a record of their actions, and it was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was lighter than the feather, you would be given passage to the field of reeds, which is their version of paradise. If your heart was heavier than the feather, because you made so many bad deeds, you would be devoured by the monster Amit, and your soul would be condemned. So ancient Egypt's 30 dynasties are typically organized by the periods that they come from. We have the Old Kingdom, which built the pyramids, the short-lived Middle Kingdom, which lost its power to regional warlords, and the New Kingdom, which was the strongest, and the first kingdom in Egypt to have a standing military in order to make sure that the pharaoh is superior to those local warlords. Ramses' grandfather was not of royal blood. Instead, he was the pharaoh's vizier, the head of government and ministers, and he was appointed to succeed Pharaoh Horemheb, who had no sons, and trusted his wise vizier to succeed him. Thus started the 19th dynasty of ancient Egypt with Ramses I, our hero's grandfather. Now, Ramses the Great's dad is called Seti I, and he was a warrior pharaoh. He traveled with his army and he personally led them to battle. He successfully reasserted Egyptian control over Canaan, Syria, and parts of Nubia, reversing territorial losses from earlier reigns. Seti also began the magnificent temples of Seti I in Abydos, famous for the Abydos King List, a chronological record of Egypt's past rulers. And as a historian, thanks for that, bro. From a young age, Ramses II, our hero, was groomed for leadership by his warlike dad, often accompanying him on military campaigns. For allies, ancient Egypt had a bunch of nations by their side. First of all, they were doing a lot of business with Byblos, Ugarit, Sidon, and Tyre, where they would get really good crafts, cedar wood, etc. Additionally, they also had an on and off friend-hate relationship with Nubia. Either they were mortal enemies, or the Nubians would be hired as mercenaries because they had excellent Pitati archers who could shoot men down at 300 paces away. For our enemies, ancient Egypt was not lacking either. They had pirates from the Mediterranean Sea. They had the Libyans to their west, they had the Nubians to their south, and they had the Hittite Empire always circling their northern borders of their conquered territories in Canaan and the Levant. And so now it's time to talk about Ramses II and how he rose to such great fame and power. We know that Ramses' date of ascension to his throne was the 3rd of Shemu, day 27, which most Egyptologists believe to be the 31st of May, 1279 BC, so like a while ago. So Ramses' army is actually the biggest in the region at the time. He has left 100,000 men by Seti I, his father, and these are completely not even recognizable by who would have been the pharaohs of the Old and the Middle Kingdoms. The New Kingdom is just on a different level in terms of army organization. They had bows, arrows, spears, and swords, and specifically the khopesh, which is a sickle-shaped sword, which was a favored weapon for slashing and disarming opponents. Last but not least, Egyptian war chariots who specialized in ranged fire while circling the enemy and kind of become a legendary unit at the time. So let's talk about the first military campaign that our man Ramses went on. So in the second year of his rule, basically immediately after he got the title of the pharaoh, he hears about pirates, the Sheridan pirates, in the Mediterranean Sea, in the delta of the Nile. And he basically says, okay, we got a bunch of pirates. What they do is that they hit and run, they pillage, and then they hide. We're going to set a trap for them. So he leaves a massive cargo ship laden with, glistening jewels and shit like that. And he just says, nothing to see here, just a beautiful ship. All the pirates come to kind of grab the treasure and maybe try to board the ship and kill the soldiers that are on it. And then just at the moment that they're doing that, Ramses' army and fleet surrounds them from all sides and makes them surrender. He captures the entire Sheridan pirate fleet in one day, and instead of massacring or executing all of them, he offers them to join as his personal guard. Ancient times hit different, bro. Having assimilated the Sheridan pirates into his army, Ramses now decides he's going to march up north to Canaan and the Levant to reassert his father's control over all the lands that Egypt have conquered. Now, it's at this point of Ramses' rule, we're just a few years into his rule, he has had significant territorial expansion. He's taken care of nuisance like the pirates. He's also solidified a new peace agreement with the Nubians, and he's really ready to try to do something that no Egyptians have ever done, which is take lands in Syria and hold them. The empire standing in his way are the Hittites. And we have to understand something. We're still in the Bronze Age. That means that people are using copper and tin to blend into bronze, which is not very reliable in terms of a war weapon compared to iron, and very hard to get. So if you're talking about one of the shortcomings of the Bronze Age, is not just that bronze is less powerful, it's also that bronze was extremely hard to get. Why? Copper was abundant, tin was really hard to get. Tin probably came from Britannia, if you believe it, during the Bronze Ages, all the way down to Egypt. This is where our mortal, the arch enemies of Ramses come in. These are the Hittites, and they have iron weapons. They are the first in their entire region to use any kind of iron in their army, and therefore they're the scariest guys. They come from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and Ramses is going to go head-to-head with them. So in order to prepare for this, he does something quite incredible. So Ramses is planning to go on a campaign to capture the strategically important city of Kadesh from the Hittites. To do this, he constructs a new capital city for his empire, Pi Ramses, in the north of Egypt, close to the front where his war would be. In that city, he builds factories to manufacture weapons, chariots, and shields, supposedly producing 1,000 weapons in a week, 250 chariots in 2 weeks, and 1,000 shields in a week and a half. Kind of sounds like from Lord of the Rings when they have that scene in the Two Towers where he's making all the Uruk-hai. After these preparations, Ramses starts to march north, and according to sources, he arrives on the 1st of May, 1274 to Kadesh.
By Ra's light, today the Hittites fall. Forward for Egypt!
However, an army the size of Ramses is one very hard to miss. And the Hittites, who I will remind you are in a defensive war here, are super prepared. In fact, they ambush Ramses' personal unit from the flank, and they smash through the Egyptian 2nd Division and encircle the pharaoh and his personal guard. For a moment, it seems like not only will the Egyptians lose, the pharaoh himself might also die. But then, reinforcements from the Egyptian Marianu chariot archers arrived.
Forward! For the Pharaoh! Loose! Take him down! Get down!
Ramses leads a counterattack and is successful at routing the entire Hittite army, who abandoned their chariots and then swam the Orontos River to the nearby walls of Kadesh, many of them drowning in the process. All in all, historians estimate that upwards of 5,000 chariots were deployed by both armies, making it the largest chariot battle ever in history. Chariots gradually lost their power as the heavy cavalry, as they were replaced by the newer, larger steeds, capable of carrying riders directly, which were both superior militarily, because it's much more maneuverable to ride a horse yourself, and obviously much easier to assemble and maintain than the expensive and fragile chariots. While Ramses did technically win the battle, routing the forces of his enemies, his forces were so exhausted and somewhat ill-prepared for a siege, so he just turns around and goes home. The Hittites, on their part, seized on his withdrawal and conquered back all of his Syrian possessions. The battle was celebrated by Ramses as a great victory in locations like Ramesses, Karnak, and Abu Simbel, and it served as powerful propaganda, portraying Ramses as a triumphant warrior who achieved a decisive victory. Following the Battle of Kadesh, Ramses doesn't give up. He divides his army into two different units, trying to avoid the same kind of confrontation and ambush like last time, and his two armies do quick work of the Levant and Syria, conquering a lot of new territories. However, those quickly change hands back to the skilled Hittites, creating another stalemate. This results in the oldest ever peace treaty that we have access to between the Egyptians and the Hittites. And let me tell you a story about this one. It was written obviously in both different languages, where the Egyptian language says that the Hittites are the one who sued for peace, while the Hittite language says that the Egyptians sued for peace. All in all, Ramses led 15 military campaigns, with 14 of them ending in absolute victory, and the one in Kadesh, ending in a draw. So now let's talk about the legacy and the civil life under Pharaoh Ramses. So, first of all, in the 30th year of his reign, Ramses celebrated the Sed Festival. So, Sed festivals were held to honor and rejuvenate the pharaoh's strength. This is not unique to Ramses, neither did he invent the tradition. What is unique about Ramses is that Sed festivals were traditionally held every 3 years, after the 30th year of your reign. So imagine you're a pharaoh, you ascend to the throne at the age of 18, you've been a pharaoh for 30 years, you're 48 years old. I mean, for ancient Egypt, that's considered to be an old man. And then what happens is that they have this festival in your honor, which has religious significance to basically give you more life force. Ramses, who sometimes held them only 2 years apart because he wanted to extra rejuvenate himself, held an unprecedented 14 Sed festivals and ruled for an unprecedented, not lived, ruled 66 years. This is the longest reign that any pharaoh had ever had, and is definitely part of the reason why Ramses is such a huge name that lingers over the entire pharaoh tradition. He issued the constructions of dozens of palaces, monuments, temples. This is obviously a testament to how rich and prosperous his kingdom was. Most notably, he issued the Ramesses, which is a massive memorial temple and a burial site for himself, and the dual temple in the complex of Abu Simbel, one dedicated to himself and one dedicated to his wife Nefertari, which was only the second time a queen in ancient Egypt was commemorated by her own temple. So the dude loved his wife. In his main temple, there are 4 massive 20-meter tall statues depicting Ramses adorning the entrance, with his wife and children in a smaller size near his feet. His monuments remain an iconic image of the pharaohs of Egypt, treatments as gods during their lifetime. I mean, look at this. I mean, what would you feel if you walked as an outsider? You're not Egyptian, right? You're from, I don't know, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, from ancient Greece, and you walk and you see massive giant statues of living men. Well, as we know, Ramses is a popular guy, and he's appeared in almost every Civ game. Civ 1, Civ 2, Civ 4, Civ 5, and Civ 6. Ramses' unique leader bonus in Civ 6 is called, well, Abu Simbel, and gives him bonuses to culture for completing buildings and wonders. No doubt, an S tier history to game bonus relationship. The Egyptian Civ ability is called Iteru, which was the ancient name of the Nile, and provides you bonuses for producing districts and wonders next to rivers. Floodplains don't prevent placements of districts and wonders and are also not going to cause you any damage. Again, S tier history to game bonus. The Egyptians' unique unit is the Mariano chariot archer, riding on a chariot, wielding a bow and a spear. These guys were the mainstay of Ramses' army. And closing with Egypt's unique tile improvement, which is the Sphinx, which was actually made 1,300 years before Ramses' time, and I think gives you a great context of just how long ancient Egypt was.